almost done with the edit tools. There's 3 more to go, and I just want to say that I never use these tools, but I want to show them to you just so that you are aware of what is possible. The add tube, I can see in circumstances where you would find that useful in certain workflows, and I have seen one video where somebody was using it to show somebody how they could make a hole through an object. I can't remember why the hole needed to be there, but that was an option they showed, and that was interesting. The Unwrap tool, I don't fully understand how that could be useful, but I'll show you one way that I got it to work. And generate complex is interesting, and I'll talk more about it when we get to it. Again, I don't see a lot of good applications for it in what we do, but it is interesting for sure. So, all right, adding a tube. So I've got our rabbit here. Maybe I don't need the wireframes for this one. When you go to add a tube, essentially it has the ability to move. Notice how it's sticking to the surfaces, but you can take these 2 different ends, these little red spheres, and it will create a tube. So I'm just going to show you that real quick, and then I'll go back in and change some of the settings. But if you notice right through here, there we go. So you can see right through there. And notice just something to pay attention to is the quality of this cylinder is better than what you saw in the preview. See how the preview shows almost like an octagon tube? It does get better than that. That's just to help with rendering, I'm guessing. So if you look, there's a lot of different options here. When you do line outside, it, here, I'm going to do it through here. Let's see, my bad. So if you do like this and you say line outside and you hit accept, it will create, see how it incorporates it into the object, but it leaves it on the outside. Whereas if you undo and change it to line inside and accept, then the Boolean cuts through it instead. So you can see it's just slightly different on what it's doing. If you switch to spline outside, see how it still goes from here to here. We'll go ahead and hit accept. It goes from here to here, kind of messed up just a little bit in there. It still joins in, you can see down below, but it keeps the tube on the outside, whereas if you switch it to spline inside, now, we'll hit accept, now that is going through here, you know, so the tube starts there, it comes out here. Okay, so if you're making a bunny that's going to hang on a necklace, maybe that works for you. Okay, undo. Then we have this auto route minimal. Auto route is the software trying to decide where should I put this tube so that it stays inside my object, and minimal is going to do it with the, you know, like the fewest number of triangles, whereas if you do the auto route smooth, it smooths it out. Okay. Radius is changing the diameter, and I don't know what collision radius is, but you can see it's changing the tube length scale. I think this, if you start increasing it, it makes a longer tube, and so as you can see, it starts to get all convoluted in there. These tend to cause it to run through tools like an iteration tool, and then the end radius is how you can change the other side. Okay, and some of these tools like this tangent length is only on, I think, with the splines. So you can see right here that it changes like the curve. I don't really care much for these two, these auto route ones. I think if your object was the shape of an S, that's when you would use an auto route, because it would be able to go through the center of it. But when you're just going to make a tube like this, I tend to see better results with the splines, whereas these are great if you want something that is straight. Okay, so that gives you an idea on what's possible with that tool. Also notice there's these different combine methods. Boolean, as you saw, would create, let's show you, would create a tube inside. Undo, switch this to append. And then what that does is you can see it creates an object, but they're joined together, as in combined together. Whereas if you do this new object one and you hit accept, it's going to create two separate objects. Okay? So depending on what it is you're looking for, undo. Switch it back to Boolean. And then this one, the direction one, works if you're doing a, let's do a line inside. Here, I'm going to bring in a separate object because I thought it made more sense when you're doing it with this. So notice we've got this cube and it's aligned with the plane. If we accept that and then we come in and try and add a tube to this one with the line, notice that we can now do an any direction or a direction constraint. And notice any direction lets me put that anywhere I put those, okay? But I can switch it to the x-axis. So now it's being constrained in the x-axis. I'm going to switch it to y since we know y is up and down. And notice that we can bring that somewhere in the center. And notice with these constrained ones that one of the red will determine where the tube starts and the other one just determines the length. Okay, so you can bring it down like that. There we go. So it's all the way through. Okay. So then, and notice it's nice because the box, or the cube, sorry, is on the grid, and we can switch it to Y and go exactly down through it. If, let's say that this tube, I'm going to hit T on the keyboard, and let's rotate it. Okay, so now it's not. Okay, so now if I went back in to the Add Tube tool, and I tried to go with the Y axis, okay, see how it's not going in line anymore? What you can do though is face normals will put the tube in the direction of the face normals. And so now, even though the box is not aligned with the grid, but it's a flat plane, I can get the tube to go directly through that flat plane because it's going in the direction of the normals. And if you remember, normals are perpendicular to the plane. And so it, you know, there's some interesting things that you could probably dream up to do with this tool. I'm going to hit cancel. I'm going to get rid of this one. We're going to switch over to our bunny, and I'm going to undo because I actually do want to keep this guy, and I want to change the rotation back to normal. All right. So let's say we want to look, oops, wrong one. Let's look at this guy, and let's first change its shape just a little bit. I'm gonna stretch it out. I'm going to select some of these triangles. I'm going to hit T for transform. I'm going to pull this over a little bit, okay? And maybe it will come down. I'm just making a geometric object because honestly I'll show it to you on the rabbit, but I don't understand exactly. All right, so let's say we got this, and I'm going to hit Control A, Control Shift G to take all the face groups off, but then I'm going to add them back using that tool we talked about earlier, the Generate Face Group. See how that gives every surface a different face group? I'm going to hit Accept, okay? So we've got this object here, and we want to go into where it says Unwrap. What Unwrap does in my understanding, and notice that the Unwrap elements, it's my group, okay? My understanding is it takes each of these planes and pulls them out and lays them out. So if you had designed something that is boxy like this, and then you were to go in and do this, and then you can hit accept and then export that out as an SVG, which is an image file, like a two-dimensional image file, then you could in theory, bring this to like a laser cutter and cut something out and then put it back together, which is great if your box is like that, with nice flat planes. The question I have is, what do you do if, and notice that, you know, sometimes it, like a lot of the time, I'll show you with the rabbit, but a lot of times I didn't quite understand how it was coming up with the different things. And this one I know will stack them all up like that, and this one puts them all out in a line, okay? And then this one I think is just trying to condense the space that they're on so that you can 3D print it. Does it really look that great in terms of idealized? Not really. I'm going to hit cancel, and that's probably it for that. I'm going to delete that, and we're going to hop to our bunny here. So one, you don't, I know that, how do I want to say this? Let me just hop in there. Oops, wrong one. Unwrap. Notice that in this instance, what it has done is it has taken the, and I don't know if any of these are better than another, but it's trying to take this shape of triangles and flatten them out. My understanding, although I've never really done this before, but my understanding is that that has to do something with saving it out as, like, let's say there was color associated with it, to save that out as like a color map that you could then later bring it into another program and stretch that over to add the color. That's my understanding, kind of, but that's about the extent of my knowledge of this tool. I don't fully get it, okay? But that's what I do know. I'm gonna go ahead and hop out of there. So then I wanna show you this generate complex, which has some pretty interesting things, but it requires face groups. If you go in like this and you don't have any face groups, it doesn't really work the way it's supposed to. So I'm going to hit cancel. We're going to add a couple face groups. We're going to use our select tool. So I just typed S on the keyboard, and that selects his head. I want to give it a smooth boundary, so I type B as in boy. And that, when you use the smooth boundary, it automatically creates a face group. And then to show you one other way of doing it, I keep doing that, I'm going to select the star, and I'm going to click and drag to put a star on his back. Okay, and that also automatically creates a face group. So if you look right now, we've got this rabbit and we've got the two face groups. Notice when I'm trying to zoom in, it's doing that. I'm just going to hop out of that and back in, and then zoom out a little bit. All right. So now I can zoom in, and it doesn't cut into the object like that. Okay, so if you look, I can now come on into edit, and now notice when I do this tool, it looks very different. See, it's got these little extra things, and I can hover over either parts of like the actual face groups like this, but I can also hover over the borders that it creates, okay? They do different things, and the way you activate one of them is to double click on it with your left mouse button. So the idea with this object, I'm going to hop over here for a second, is this is why it's used, okay? If you look at this, these were printed on an FDM printer, which technically can be printed in multiple colors. You could also, you might not have in your office, but let's say you want to send off to a service for printing, and they have like a PolyJet kind of printer where it can print multiple colors all at once. And you want to be able to separate your model into different STL files. For example, these different files, this one right here, this is sent to the printer as different STL files. Even though it comes to the printer all in one piece, it comes separated into the different files, and that's how you're able to tell it, you know, print this one in this color, print this STL in this color, and this STL in this color. The printer can print them in different colors if it has that capability. But that, who knows, you know, maybe this tool becomes more useful in the day that somebody figures out how to print dual colors in an SLA printer. But if you have a printer that can print two colors, this might be a fun tool to play with. So there's two ways that it can do it. One of them is to create an offset, and one of them is to create almost like a cut through it, but it's not a plane cut because plane cuts are flat. This makes a cut through an object that is curved. And I'm thinking, well, you know, I didn't know about this before, and now I'm wondering if one day I'll find an instance where I want to cut something, but I don't necessarily need it flat. This might be a way to do it. I'm going to show you the way I think this object should be made into complex, and then I'm going to come back and do the opposite so you can see why doing it the wrong way is a problem. I'm going to hit cancel though, because one thing I have noticed is that if you try running this tool on an object that's open like this, it messes it up, okay? And I'll try to remember to point that out to you, but I'm going to go ahead and just close the hole right here, and it does better. It runs the proper way when you do that, okay? So coming in, I'm going to double click on this, and notice when I double click on it, it creates this offset right here, okay? That's because it's gonna in the end make a star that has some thickness to it going down into the model, and on the bunny it's going to leave a depression, okay? But on the head, instead of clicking on the head to do the same offset kind of thing, because it doesn't make sense to offset the whole head into it, and you'll see when I come back and do it again, you'll see what I mean. But on this one, I'm going to double click on that and see how that's creating a fill in between the two. So I'm going to hit accept, and notice over here in the object browser that I had a bunny, but now it's showing the complex. Okay, notice when I show the complex, you can see inside there, if I turn on the bunny, that's my original, okay? And you can see the difference between the two. This has stuff going on in the side. When I turn on the complex, at this point, these aren't separate objects, but if you come under the edit menu, you'll notice there's two extra things. Filter complex is kind of like an undo. It'll delete anything inside and then reseal the surfaces. So it's kind of like undoing what you just did in the generate complex. But when you do a split complex, notice over here that it created 3 different objects on the scene, okay? And if I took this object and hit it, you'll notice that I've got my head with that nice smooth transition, and I have this piece right here that has some depth to it, okay? And then if I turn that on and turn these off, you can see what I mean, or I'll turn off the wireframes. You can see what I mean, how there's space where this, I don't know which one it is, where this one, see how that star just fits right down in there, okay? So the idea is I could do this, and then I could take these 3 different STL files, and I could take it to a printer that can print multiple colors, and I can assign different colors to each of those pieces so that when it prints, you're going to get something that looks like this image right here, okay? So that's an interesting tool. Let's do this. I'm just going to delete all this. We're going to go back to our original, okay? And I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to come back into the generate complex, and this time I'm going to double click on the head of the rabbit, and I'm going to double click on the edge of that one. And you can start to see what it's doing on these. Notice on the rabbit, it's instead of doing the offset into the body of the rabbit, it's doing like creating a hollow on the rabbit, which is interesting, which I guess, you know, technically could work on a 3D printer, but I wonder about a couple things, and I'll show you what I mean. And then this right here, instead of being an offset, see how it's like kind of capping it off? And so we're going to hit accept, and then so it still looks normal, but then we're going to split the complex, okay? And so now when we come into this one, and this one technically might be fine, okay, depending on, I know that one time when I did it, it left some really thin areas that I was concerned might not work. But notice over here on the rabbit, it created like this mask on the rabbit, okay? But notice the shrunken head part right here and this part right here. This is my concern. Is that going to cause a problem with the printer? If not, then great. It worked just fine, and it's going to allow it to print the one part of the head, like the outer rim of the head, the shell of the head. And then this one right here, I guess right in here might be the closest thing to what I was trying to talk about. See how there's some overlap right there? And I think I saw one over here too. See how there's this overlap? I don't know if that's going to cause a problem. And so I guess what I'm saying is if you end up with an object where part of the object is like an extension, like if I had my arm and I wanted my arm to be in one color, then I would recommend double clicking on, let me make sure I get this right, on the line so that it just cuts through it and prints the whole arm in that material. Whereas if I have like a, let's say I'm printing a Superman and I've got his symbol on something like that, going into the model a little bit makes more sense to me. So you would double click on the actual S symbol of Superman. And so that's the, and you know, obviously, even though if you're not doing this for printing purposes, but you want to create an object that nestles into itself, this can be used for that as well. The one thing that I'll say is that most of the stuff that we are doing in dentistry, we're printing, even if we're printing it in different materials, we're printing them separately, not at the same time. And so, for example, this piece right here, when we did it as an offset, there's no way you could print those in two separate pieces and then fit one into the other. One, there's too many undercuts, and two, it's too tight of a fit. And so in dentistry, doing it this way doesn't make a lot of sense because we have to create offsets, we have to get rid of undercuts, things like that. So hopefully that gives you, you know, some more inspiration to play. So have fun with that.